Good afternoon. Good morning. It's still morning. This is a joint committee of the Committee of Public Safety and Licenses and Inspection, and a joint hearing on resolution number 140034. Will the clerk please read the title of the resolution?
A resolution calling for joint hearings by the Committee on Public Safety and the Committee on Licenses and Inspections to investigate and explore the need for a third-party structural inspection or an engineering report on residential rental units or fire escapes on residential buildings to be submitted with the city's housing inspection license, also known as a housing rental license or registration, and required for any entity that rents any type of housing unit in Philadelphia.
Thank you. Why we're here, I think everyone who knows there was a fatal fire escape collapse on January of 2014 at 22nd and Locust. We are particularly sensitive about building-related collapses as a result of 22nd and Market Street. We are going to be ever more vigilant about our responsibility to keep the public safe. Now, with that said, we are not trying to create onerous situations where it is almost an impossible task to monitor, but we want to find that happy medium, if not so happy, at least comfortable medium, where we can actually do public good, but not with a purpose of trying to make people safe, but not trying to put people out of business. And we sincerely mean that. We've heard from a number of interests, both government interests, both private sector interests and owners of buildings, but also from the public saying that this is the kind of thing that we need to look at. And it doesn't cost us anything to at least look at an issue, and that's what we intend to do with these hearings. We found out that in Boston, there are at least 8,000 fire escapes, and with Philadelphia being slightly larger than Boston, we think that we're approaching somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 fire escapes. Who's responsible for them? Who looks at them? And these are the kinds of questions that I think we need to have answered today. We look at national standards, and our preliminary research revealed that 2012 edition of the International Fire Code was not adopted by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and not adopted by the city of Philadelphia. That is a concern of ours, that we at least minimally mimic the best practices of the federal government and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So today I hope to get some answers and some strategies on how we can approach this. Joining me today are Councilman O'Brien, Councilman Johnson, Councilman Greenlee, and Councilman O. And with that, will you read the names of the first witnesses? No, what we will do is look at a video that puts into context why we are here and the collapse that we experienced in January. Is there a way to get some volume to that? We're experiencing a technical challenge. pronounce his last name. Mangalusi, okay. I think one of the things that we are experiencing is growth and success. We're a city that, in particular in older parts of the city, the population of new residents has increased in old housing stock that in most cases is over 50 years old. And the way and who is responsible for fire escapes is rather nebulous as we look at the rules. It says the owner's responsibility, and you know, we want and believe the best in all owners, but every now and then we should check. And so we want to take a look at this. So why don't we, while we deal with that, I think...
Is it Australia some type of home? If you have a chance to do one of PP2 of nice Australian experiences, which you would imagine text that you're in Australia, Delta, and Virgin Australia Airlines.
Investigation into a fire escape that gave way to a young man and sent 2 young women to the hospital. The fire escape collapsed yesterday morning at the John C. Bell House. It was an historic landmark that had been converted into apartments in the mid-1940s. It's located on South 22nd Street or Locust Street in the city's Rittenhouse Square neighborhood. The city is looking into whether the fire escape was up to code and if the remaining sections are safe. It says the building has no history of structural violations. We spoke to a personal injury lawyer who is unaffiliated with this case but has worked for 30 years representing victims in collapses. He suspects the fire escape may have been in need of repair before it collapsed.
Adequately maintained and inspected fire escapes don't collapse.
Meantime, the city says the owners of the building are cooperating with the investigation.
Okay. So, as you can tell, we've become popular, but with that growth comes some challenges. We are looking at older housing stock that needs to be modernized for this influx of new and sometimes exuberant residents that think fire escapes are also a good place to have a party. And we have to really be careful as we experience that growth, how we monitor it and how we regulate it and how we inspect it. And with that, we want to take that challenge on today in these hearings. Are any of the members of the committee, do you have anything to say? No? With that, can you read the names of the first witnesses to testify?
Mike Maynor, Deputy Commissioner, Department of L&I. Henry J. Costo, Deputy Commissioner, Philadelphia Fire Department.
Thank you, gentlemen, and still good morning.
Good morning.
Please state your name for the record and begin testimony.
Good morning, Councilman Jones and Councilwoman Sanchez and members of the Committees on Public Safety and Licenses and Inspections. My name is Michael Maynor. I'm Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Licenses and Inspections, and I am here to testify in support of Resolution Number 140034. This resolution calls for hearings to investigate and explore the need for third-party structural inspection or an engineering report on residential rental units or fire escapes on residential buildings to be submitted with the city's housing inspection license, also known as housing rental license, and required for any entity that rents any type of housing unit in Philadelphia. As building codes became more common around the turn of the 20th century, fire safety became an important concern for new construction. Building owners were increasingly required to provide adequate escape routes, and at the time, fire escapes seemed the best option available. Not only could they be included in new construction at a low cost, but they could be very easily added to existing construction. As building codes evolved and more safety concerns addressed over subsequent additions, all construction above a certain number of stories were required to have a second means of egress, and external fire escapes were allowed as a retrofit option for existing buildings. Realizing the long-term maintenance issues with these fire escapes, owners and developers stopped installing them in the 1980s. Eventually, in 2004, exterior metal fire escapes were voted out of the code for new construction. Being an old city, many of these exterior metal fire escapes were added to the existing buildings to provide a secondary means of egress. These fire escapes were never intended to be used as balconies or be used by firefighting personnel. Owners of buildings with metal fire escapes are required to maintain them in accordance with the property maintenance code. While many owners thought removing the rust and painting was adequate maintenance, there could be some underlying issues not visible by a normal visual inspection process. Therefore, the Department of Licenses and Inspections joins with Council in support of adopting laws and regulations to provide better oversight and guidance to building owners in the maintenance of these exterior metal fire escapes. We agree that a third-party structural inspection or an engineering report needs to be obtained by the property owner in order to ensure the safety of residents and visitors so that the property, and to ensure the safety of our firefighters as well. Thank you for the opportunity to provide the department's testimony. I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Why don't we allow you to testify, and then we'll open up for questions from the panel.
Good morning, council members. Deputy Commissioner, Technical Services, Philadelphia Fire Department, Henry J. Costo. I don't have a written testimony. Much of what I have to say is based on our ongoing dialogue with L&I and some of the personal observations that are a result from my actual personal response to both of the incidents to which you've alluded earlier, 22nd Street and that fire escape collapse. We are certainly, I think, moving hand in glove with L&I in terms of our approach to this issue. It's not an issue that we were necessarily, of which we were unaware previously, but our awareness is limited, and that is that we are not building engineers, and the defects and deficiencies in those types of things that we see in the fire escapes, and we know that virtually every single one of them are aged, are such that there are things that are obvious, such as rust, bolts pulling from walls, pieces of that escape that do not function. Accordingly, a policy has been, for as long as I've been on a department, which is, I may not look it, but it's approaching 40 years. I started when I was 11. Anyway, it is policy that we do not use at a strategic or tactical level. We do not utilize fire escapes in any way during a fire ground or a fire operation. It's not included in our plans, only because we are not assured of the reliability. So if it is a last resort, obviously if the choice comes, do I use the escape or jump out the window, well, I'll use the escape, but it's not something that we actually include in our attack strategy or our plans, only because we cannot be assured of the reliability. Having said that, we also include, and this is some of the things I'd like to say, we appreciate very much the efforts of council to address this issue, and we also appreciate and understand that in the end it will take some time for this to wind and work its way through the process. But there are things that we can do now, and those are the types of things that in conjunction with L&I, and we've always had a collaborative, positive relationship with licenses and inspections. I think the need for that has been reinforced by some of the recent events, but we would like to start to do some things now that address some of the issues that you brought up. We really can be, because of our annual inspection program that we do, we can be sort of a vigilant partner in terms of becoming aware of and noticing and identifying, recognizing those buildings that have fire escapes, because if you drive down any one of our major streets, you're not going to necessarily know or even be aware of the fact that on the back of that structure there is a fire escape. They're not generally on the front of the building. So you mentioned about counts. We don't have a good count. One of the things that we can start to do is get a count when we're doing our inspections, and then give that, when we get those numbers, to notify L&I. It's one of the things that we're working towards in enhancing that partnership that we have, particularly using technology that's there. Once we identify, then we can refer. And once that's been referred to L&I and that is in the process, whatever process ultimately derives from what your council's doing now, and whatever methodology is used, we can monitor, we can refer. If it's a certification by third party, we can say, well, it hasn't been done in 3 years, or it's not, there's not tagged. Whatever the mechanism or process you have in place, we can be one point for recognizing and ensuring that it's been done and referring to L&I if it hasn't been. So that's kind of the monitoring, but it goes further. The commissioner, one of my goals, fire prevention falls under my bailiwick. One of the things that I would like to do is expand our focus beyond, Councilman, we've spoken about this, to expand beyond simply focusing on fire prevention and to start to look at a more all-encompassing community risk reduction approach. One of those approaches and one of the focuses should be things revolving around these fire escapes and the issues related to that. So we would like to do is start, and we have the mechanism in place to do it, to train our people to be vigilant regarding these fire escapes, to ensure that they, and reinforce the need that when we do our annual inspection program, that they identify and take a look. Again, limited to the obvious flaws and defects, because we are not trained as engineers, but we can put a program in place that educates and makes them more aware of some of the less obvious and more subtle concerns regarding these things. So it would be to increase PFD awareness and training. But it would also be to make sure that they understand the need for and reinforce the focus on maintaining that kind of effort in terms of inspecting and identifying such. Again, to reemphasize the policy of not utilizing these fire escapes. But it goes further in terms of educating the public, and I'm seeing that in two ways. Educating building owners for the need to keep these things in place prior to the fact when we have legislation that requires them to do that. Our education, I hope, would be that they would recognize the need and to do what needs to be done out of enlightened compliance rather than out of fear and enforcement procedures. Okay, maybe that's a pipe dream, but I would like to see some of that start to happen. So when we make our contacts, L&I doesn't necessarily have that annual frequent contact with a building owner that we do with our neighborhood fire stations within a fire safety and education district. We can hand them literature. We can provide them literature. We may need a couple of bucks to try to produce that, but we can find ways to get that literature in the hands of owners. At the same time, you referenced the tenants, or in some places they're actually owners of condominiums and such, and the attractiveness, and I don't want to call it an attractive nuisance, but it almost is. If it's not being maintained and it's a pleasant place to congregate, we need to educate the public on the understanding that that's not what that is designed to do. It's designed for an escape from imminent danger in a fire, not for them to hang out and have parties. And unfortunately, we have not taken advantage of opportunities to educate the public in that regard. So yes, a lot of the onus does fall on the owners, but I think that in the meantime, we can do a series of things in terms of education. Our own people within the fire department, the owners of these buildings, and tenants of these buildings. And I think we can do a lot while this process is going on, and then once it's in place, to educate and get people to do what needs to be done. So we certainly agree with, and I know there's going to be pushback in terms of some people would like to see L&I do that and do the inspections. Fire do that, do the inspections, because ultimately if it's third party, I'm sure there's concerns that cost will just be passed on to the tenants from the owner. But at the end of the day, it needs to be done. We're aware that it needs to be done. And we'll be working with L&I to ensure that whatever process in place is implemented effectively.
You know, one of the challenges of being an elected official is to often have to go into areas that we don't have a particular area of expertise, but just an interest, a public interest in making sure that people are safe. And so we rely on people who do this every day, whether it's the fire department, L&I, or whether it's the industry. And so what we want you to know is that the purpose here today is to try to put our heads together to figure out what is practical, what is doable, and what will improve the safety of the public. And that's it. It's not a, you know, we're going to, you know, throw building owners to the wolves, because they provide housing, and it's important to do that. But in the same time, when a parent sends his child to be educated in the city, and there's an expectation that there's a reasonableness of safety, and that's what we're trying to do. So let me ask a couple of questions, and I see some of my colleagues are interested as well. And there's no right answer, wrong answer, just the facts. How many properties in the city of Philadelphia have fire escapes?
Exterior fire escapes?
Yes.
We don't know at that time. It's an appurtenance to a building. It's much like a cornice. You know, we don't keep track of that, but through this process, I'm sure by the end of the day, we'll know how many.
I just wanted to establish the record. In the city of Philadelphia, how many rental licenses are there issued?
There's approximately 80,000 for 281,000 units.
So there are 80,000 rental licenses approximately. We have a figure slightly lower than that at 66,833. So, I mean, we're not going to quibble over that. But how many of them would require by code a secondary escape area, and that's either through the fire department or through L&I's BOCA code?
Every building more than 3 stories is required to have a second means of egress. Most of them are interior means of egress because, as I said in the testimony, developers and building owners realize the extreme amount of maintenance costs an exterior fire escape has.
So, okay. Of that, is there a standard? What is the professional standard that, so there's varying types of fire escapes, I would imagine.
Correct.
And I've seen them as diverse and primitive, if you would, as a rope kind of, so give me a sense of the types of fire escapes you've seen, and what is, quote, the standard?
Back in the 80s, we had a metal fire escape that used to be bolted through the wall, that you would throw this ladder out the window. And that was...
It looks like a chain link?
Chain link, or it was hard steel that you could throw out a 3rd floor window, and that was for buildings with 3 units or more. Most of your fire escapes now are your typical fire escapes that you can walk down. Exterior fire escapes technically don't require a railing. Many put a railing on for convenience. So just take that into account.
So give me a little more, so what are the ranges? If the rope is probably the worst, and I'm not qualified to say what is worse, but I would imagine someone with physical disabilities would have some difficulty using that as a means of escape. But let's say if that's the worst, what is the gold standard for fire escapes?
Well, again, you could go back in the 30s. They actually had chutes that you would jump into and slide out the building and press against the side so you wouldn't go flying down. But the gold standards actually is, you know, your high-rise building fire tower. They're fire escapes.
So those are encased fire escapes?
Correct. 2-hour rated fire escape.
Right. So what then, if the gold standard is that version of an encased fire escape, and the least is the rope with a knot in it or chain link, what is the medium that you think should be, and is that a question of individual design?
It depends upon the design of the building, how many feet to the nearest fire escape. Some buildings have 3 fire escapes because of how large it is. So it varies building by building on its design.
So at the time a person applies for a rental license, do we inspect? What is our inspection process?
Many of our inspections occur by complaint. We have proactive programs, and again, they're programs, they stop and they start over the years because we utilize the same inspectors. We have an R2 program. Last year we inspected 405, or fiscal year to date, we inspected 405 three-unit or more buildings proactively.
Say that number again.
405.
So out of the 66,000, we've done 400?
No, that's, out of the 600 rental license, remember, many of those are single-family dwellings, okay? So it would be units with three units or more. I can get you the exact counts of how many licenses go to buildings with 3 units or more.
So what is the role of the fire department within that inspection?
Well, that particular role, the reference you had in terms of rental properties, we're not actively involved in that when they apply for rental licenses regarding rental properties. Our role, again, is when we identify buildings and structures during that routine annual, we have an annual block inspection program.
So you talked about a complaint-driven process.
Right.
Which is stimulated by a complaint by usually a resident, I would imagine, that would come out.
Well, some of those complaints, actually, the fire department does a great job in referring
That's what I was about to
to,
say.
referring Dal and I, when they do their block checks, they'll come across items that may or may not be violations of the code. We'll get a referral, and they do a great job referring items to us during these block checks.
So, and this will be my last question, and I'll recognize Councilman O. If Greenlee Inc., can I use you? Why not? Greenlee Inc. decides they bought 5 properties at Sheriff's Sale, and now they've decided to get in the rental business and want to go and apply for a license with the city of Philadelphia. Does that trigger an inspection?
No, it does not.
Councilman O?
But Councilman, I would say, though, again, as part of our process, now, we don't inspect every single family dwelling, but there are, as part of that annual inspection program, buildings that fit, and they're pretty much common sense criteria that fall into buildings that we would need to inspect and do a fire inspection, and it's pretty comprehensive on the things that we look at. It would include looking at the fire escape. Again, on that awareness level for the obvious flaws and defects. So when Mike references receiving complaints, we don't call them complaints, they're referrals, but they pretty much are complaints. It's like the difference between interview and interrogation.
So just for the record, as I pass off to Councilman O, how many inspections of the 66,000 rental licenses did we do last year?
We've done, I would say about 65,000 inspections last year on rental properties. And that would include vacants, and that would include vacant lots. One of the things we do annually, we inspect our schools annually. We inspect residential daycares annually. We inspect high-rise buildings annually.
So how many were new last year? New licenses?
I don't know that number offhand.
Councilman O?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For residential units that have external fire escapes, the building has to be insured. That is a requirement, is it not? Owners have to insure their buildings?
Yes.
If they're renting it? I would think so. If I'm wrong, let me know.
I would make an assumption, yes. I believe your mortgage company requires insurance.
Okay, is there anything in the code that requires that if a building owner is
Yes.
renting, that they must have insurance?
Yes.
Okay. And then the exterior fire escape would be covered by the insurance, would it not?
I would make that assumption, yes.
I would think so. I could be wrong. Somebody could tell
Right.
me otherwise.
I-
And if the if there is some problem with the fire escape, in other words, the building owner who, of that apartment building is negligent in maintaining it or having it inspected, that they would not be possibly covered by their insurer.
What our inspectors do when they go to a site and they see an exterior fire, exterior stair tower, they do a visual inspection. They check and make sure it's not rusty, make sure it's painted. I think working with council will take it a step further, much like our facade inspections. Our facade inspections, every building more than 60 feet is required to have a facade inspection every 5 years. I would recommend that we similarly do something like that with fire escapes, that they have the proper load testing, because a lot can be missed on a visual inspection. A fire tower could look good, but may not be structurally compliant. So that's why we can work with council to get a more comprehensive testing done on these fire escapes, and we look forward to doing that.
Yes. And I appreciate that, but as I, from my understanding, you just bear with me as I go through this, I'm interested to know that someone who owns and rents out a building in Philadelphia that has an external fire escape is required to insure the building, including the fire escape, and with that, I would assume, and I could be wrong, that there is a requirement that they are supposed to upkeep and maintain that external fire escape for the insurer. And typically, I would think the insurer would want some type of documentation that ensures them that their coverage is being, complied with. If that is the case,
I can speak a lot to the fire codes, and insurers are far more stringent than the codes in most all cases.
okay,
Usually the insurance company
Sure.
comes in and says, you need to do this, you need to do that.
I would think so.
Right.
So what I'm wondering, and I guess we'll hear from someone, the representative of apartment buildings, is that if there is such a requirement on them, that they would have to send some document if their insurance was terminated or in jeopardy of termination because of the failure to provide the documentation that fire escape is being maintained properly. Your L&I could receive a copy of that or could be required to receive that notice that would trigger the inspection and compliance process. Is that a possibility?
That is very similar to the facade, where you can have it inspected, it's safe with repairs, or it's unsafe. So you can categorize them like that, and the unsafe would trigger something with L&I. The safe with repairs would also trigger something. So
Well,
that's a strong
Okay,
possibility.
so the reason I'm bringing it up is because I don't know where the money and manpower is in the city for all of this, and I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I would just like to trim it down to see where we can practically do this. So there should not be a building in the city of Philadelphia that is renting to people that is not insured. It should be insured for all the possible liabilities and injuries that may occur, and that should include fire escapes, balconies, roofs that are accessible, and everything else. We, the city, should have, along with these licenses, some type of record electronically that there is coverage, adequate coverage, and with that, that there is a requirement that in the renewal of the insurance, that the city is notified whenever the insurance is in jeopardy or is terminated or canceled because of failure to provide adequate inspection and other things. On top of that, I am all for some type of, further inspection and other things. However, I don't know how this is going to be done otherwise, whether people just go out and look at fire escapes, and there's so many of them, and you go up, and we don't have structural engineering people. Third parties are very expensive if they don't need to come out. So I'm just kind of wondering about how this is going to be practically done. You know, what is the trigger mechanism if there isn't something already? So if there is something incorrect about what I'm saying somewhere, they don't need to have insurance, fire escapes are not going, then let me know.
We can work with council and the fire department on developing regulations and what the best way to do that.
Well, maybe, so,
If
I
I,
understand.
if I might, Councilman, within the fire code, I, as familiar as I may be, and the two gentlemen with me, somewhat more familiar because they work with it day to day, I have not seen a requirement within the fire code that requires a building to have insurance, liability, or otherwise. I know as a practical matter, if a person has a mortgage, the mortgage holder will require you to have those types of insurance. I know your reference regarding the insurer would like to have that building inspected, and it would include the fire escapes. The problem with, or one issue with, we get similar, somewhat, I would call them false positives. We will get a notification if someone's driver's license has been compromised in the fire department for non-payment of his registration fees, etc. So they would suspend his license. That's not the same as a suspension that's related to an error or a problem while he was operating. Two different concerns. Similarly here, you could have insurance suspended simply because the insured didn't pay his bills. So those notifications would be coming to us either way, and I think we would miss the buildings that are not insured because the person owns it outright, doesn't have a mortgage, isn't required to have certain types of and certain levels of insurance. I'm not an insurance expert, but I'm basing this on my experience. We would miss an awful lot, and we both appreciate very much the concerns of the financial cost that would derive from having the fire department try to do these inspections and training people now to be engineers, and now trying to get them out to what could be 8,000 to 10,000 fire escapes that are out there. So we appreciate how difficult that would be and the burden it would place on the taxpayers of Philadelphia. That, I think, is why the focus is and the look is, from our perspective, to a third-party assessment, because they are engineers, and that cost would be borne by the building owners and probably more appropriately than the entire tax base of the city of Philadelphia. Having said that, I understand that tenants are saying, whoa, that means my rent's going to go up. So obviously we have to strike a balance there, but at the end of the day, I don't think, and I can't speak for L&I, I just know my experience with the numbers and types of inspections that need to be done and the increasing demands that we're putting now in terms of buildings that are about to be demolished and new initiatives in that regard, and then our limitations in terms of the types of inspections we need to do. I think that is an issue if you try to put that onus on the fire department and L&I. We're back to recognizing those limitations, recognizing we don't have accounts, trying to do some things now to address some of these issues. But we're still back to what the Deputy Commissioner said earlier. If the owner is inclined to put a coat of fresh paint on a fire escape, to the untrained eye, it could look fine. And we're back to why we have these issues about us not using them in the first place because of that. But I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is insurance may be one mechanism by which we become aware. I don't think one single mechanism is going to do the trick. I think the comprehensive approach of a series of recognitions and identifications and notifications, complaints, referrals, or otherwise, through the 311 system, through what we do on a daily basis. And it could be as simple as, this is what I was saying about educating our people, when we had an EMS response in one of those facilities, and while our people are there, they happen to look over and say, boy, that fire escape's in bad shape. We need to make the referral. So that's the types of awareness I'd like to increase within the fire department and start to address this now while we identify this process. And if it is a third-party certification that takes place, as they're recommending, every 5 years, it would require placarding or some sort of labeling at that premises, that we would be able to check that and say, you know what, they haven't been inspected in 7 years, and that tag is not in place. We can make the referral and make the notification. And as onerous as it may be for the owner to have that inspection done, if it's set up that the process is every 5 years, it's a one-time cost every 5 years.
I appreciate what you're saying. I don't disagree with a lot of what you're saying, and I don't think there's one step to the process. You know, so I understand that, you know, there should be some mechanism to alert the city that there's a potential problem. They can quickly find out if it is a failure to pay insurance, or if there hasn't been, for example, if there's insurance, some other, they could then send out an inspector or a fire educator. You could go through this process, require a third-party structural engineer. The issue that I'm concerned with, you know, really there's two issues. One is what's practical, and number two, what's effective. So, for example, we could pass a law that every homeowner has to pay for an inspection of their property in Philadelphia every 2 years and bear that cost, and we'll make sure that nothing goes wrong. But if we don't need to do that, you know, I don't think that we should. If there is something, if we do not require that these fire escapes be insured, maybe we should, and we should get those reports and other things. I mean, I really am not clear. I'm not an expert in this area. I'm just, you know, I would think that the industry standards would be applied by the insurance company as to the level of maintenance that's required by the property owner. And the city can always make adjustments that there should be more, you know, more inspections or sort of whatever it is. But without that triggering mechanism, without the insurance to cover, you know, that problem, just having a geographical location throughout the city where LNI sends people, or we require property owners to have periodic examinations of fire escapes, you know, I don't know how to pick the right number, every 2 years, every 10 years, every 7 years, you know, that, because I don't have any expertise. But we could find out later. But I'm very interested at this point in time in whether we could kind of hone in a little better based on the practices that are out there and what the code requires. If the code does not require that the external fire escapes be insured, which comes with it an inspection process, we could always add to the inspection process. I'd like to know that because it'll help me to understand what's going on here better. And right now I don't know that we do or do not require the building owners to insure those, their buildings to include those external fire escapes. I'm just assuming we do, but I have no real idea. Does anybody know? If you don't, it's fine, because I don't know.
The building codes and property maintenance codes don't require insurance. They're how to build your building. They're the owner's manual on how to maintain your building. Owner's manual, if you will. Okay. So there's no insurance. We look at the building and the condition of the building.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilman. Before I go to Councilman Johnson, a couple of things. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania issues driver's licenses. As a part of that, they require drivers to have insurances. And it's not a self-policing mechanism. We trust citizens in the Commonwealth, but there's a trigger that goes to the Commonwealth when an insurance policy lapses, which invalidates the the vehicle. Similarly, though, there's a second-tier inspection by the Philadelphia Police Department. When you have an accident or when they pull you over, what do they say? License, registration, and insurance. And the reason that is because there is a responsibility that the city has to make sure that the drivers that are driving are insured and to a degree safe. That's why those inspections are looked at. That's why they do that. So it equally, when we talk about citizens, and many, and in particular in my district, there are some communities that are approaching 60% rental. 60% rental. And I'm not talking about income. I'm talking about East Falls, where you have a large student population that comes in and rents these houses, or whether you talk about Haddon and Carroll Park, where a large conversion of residential property, similar to Councilman Heenan's district, where there's a large number of rental properties in the area. So it is important that we do a number of checks and balances. One, I agree with my colleague about ensuring and making sure that the property is adequately insured, which should include the fire escape. But also, I think it's important that our professionals in L&I, our professionals in the fire department, in their course of duty, when they're inspecting facades, to take a look around back. Because again, the standard for fire escapes is varying. Somebody can say a fire escape is a rope, throw it out the window, and therefore there's a second tier of escape that probably would be challenging for a paraplegic, probably would be challenging for people with physical limitations. So there's such a wide variety of these things, and it's better to do it periodically. And so we come to the question of how long an inspection should happen. I'm not at this point prepared to say, but I'm thinking within 5 years is reasonable. Why? Why do we pick 5 years? Because when we qualify for a capital project here in the city of Philadelphia to put money in, it's a 5-year period that we expect there to be a reasonable life cycle for that capital project. And I think that a fire escape qualifies in my mind as a capital project. So every 5 years, somebody should kick the tires, test the weight of that kind of property. And if the onus is on the insurance company, okay. But the visual issue of rust, bolts coming out of the walls, and clearly, I believe 90% of the folk that have rental license are responsible individuals. It's the 10% that can get us killed, that can cause catastrophic industry. And the last thing I'll say is, it is a statement to me that our fire professionals won't even use fire escapes because of the condition or the varying condition they may be in. And that's why we're having this hearing today. Chair recognizes Councilman Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to get some clarity on
Chair recognizes that Councilman Heenan is also in attendance today.
Just want to get some clarity on a couple of things. And obviously this happened in the 2nd Councilmanic District, so it made me pay attention to it even more, and I thank my colleague, Chairman Jones, for stepping to the plate to actually take a look at this issue as well. So it was mentioned under L&I that at a certain, 2004, the property, the code discontinued certain types of fire escapes and being required to being built. Did I hear that correctly?
That's correct. It was completely written out of the code in 2004.
So in the new construction?
New construction, it's not an issue. They can't put them on.
Okay. So what type of fire escapes are putting, well, let me back up. The height of a property, right? At what time does at what threshold does the requirement of having some type of fire escape or egress kicks in that you actually have to have one? 4-story, 5-story?
More than 3 stories and an R2, which is more than 2 units.
And you said after 2004, it was completely taken out of the code, right?
That
So
is
what replaced it?
You were required to put interior stair towers in.
Okay. And part, it's called interior?
Interior stair towers. And what they are, they're stairways down to a public way that are rated. Typically, they're 2-hour rated.
Okay, and how are they evaluated?
Well, when the building's built, it's actually inspected by a certified building inspector. So they inspect and the certificate of occupancy is given out, and then the property maintenance inspector will go through, when they do a property maintenance inspection, will go through the stair tower to make sure that, it's not blocked. It has its pull stations where they belong and things like that, the upkeep and maintenance of that stair tower.
Councilman, if it might clarify, in 2004, the requirement for secondary or tertiary means of egress wasn't removed from the code. It was just the acceptability of an exterior fire escape to satisfy that requirement was no longer acceptable.
So those fire escapes are pretty much like the old models?
Right. They hopefully, and we won't be seeing them in 20 years, but
Just from your professional opinion, what's the weight that the average fire escape, and obviously they're old, can usually handle? Would you know that from a fire standpoint?
It's typically required to handle 100 pounds per square foot.
But that's a dead load, and that's not
Right.
a moving load. That's not people shifting about. That's, again, back to that I don't want to say abuse, but misuse of the fire escapes for what they're really intended. If you have people partying and dancing and moving about, it changes from that dead load requirement. That's another reason why we don't want to use them, because we're running and we have extra equipment and more than one person moving past at that same time in close proximity.
And just to add something, the fire escapes were meant to escape a fire. You should never be on that fire escape if there's not a fire in your building.
Okay. Thank you. Let me just follow up on, and I was asking my staff to follow up on some information that we were taking a look at in terms of who actually does the inspection of the fire escapes. Give me the difference between the work of a professional engineer or what you would call a qualified, acceptable building official.
Okay, a professional engineer may have...
And this is based upon the National Fire Escape Association.
Okay, a professional engineer would perform load tests on the fire escape to determine the load, and they could also do X-ray tests on the brick wall and the attachment.
That's beyond the superficial. Let me just...
Correct.
Like how
It's
we
beyond a
did,
visual inspection.
kind of how OPA did AVI, they kind of just went through my district and said, oh, that's worth $100,000 per property, without going inside.
It's a visual inspection, and even engineers will write in reports if they do a visual inspection that was a visual inspection, because there are other methods that they could do on various types of inspections according to their engineering practices. So they would perform load tests and things like that.
So what would actually be a other qualified and acceptable building official? Would you have anybody else that would do the same type of qualifying or evaluating of fire escapes separate than an actual engineer?
There are
Who else?
the state recognizes engineers because they're licensed by the state, they're certified, and they're insured. There are some other fire escape
Councilman,
certifications, if you will.
does your question go to, I think you said you mentioned your staff had brought you some information from the National Fire Escape Association.
Yes.
I'm holding that in my hand, and it does reference a registered structural engineer or others qualified and acceptable by the fire code.
And I'm trying to find out.
And I really don't know what to be, in all candor.
Really wanted to get the two of you experts' opinion. So in your expert opinion, you pretty much would go with the qualified engineer.
Correct.
Thank you.
you, Councilman. Are there any other questions from this panel for these sets of witnesses? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you.
Will the clerk please read the names of those next panel of witnesses?
Dominic Guarini, Daryl Zaslow.
It's good afternoon now.
Good afternoon.
Welcome. Thank you for your patience. Please state your name and begin your testimony.
My name is Dominic Guarini. I am a partner with the law firm of Klein Inspector here in Philadelphia. At the outset, Councilman, I want to thank you and all the members of the panel today for taking the time to study this very important public safety issue. I'm here today because I represent two of the people that we saw in that news article. I represent Laura O'Brien, who suffered serious injuries when she fell off the fire escape, and I represent the estate and the family of Albert Suh, who was killed when he fell when the fire escape collapsed. And I can tell you, gentlemen, that having spent time with Ms. O'Brien and with the Suh family, we are here today to make sure that this never happens again and to do what we can do to prevent it. It's a very simple fix, and I think, Councilman, you have honed in on the issue, and that is we have not yet, in the city of Philadelphia, adopted the 2012 International Fire Code. We've done the 2009 edition, it's changed, and it's time for us in the city of Philadelphia, at least with respect to this issue, to become current and to adopt the standards that are set forth. And Councilman, you were asking in some of your questions, should we do it 2 years, should we do it 5 years? Well, the fire code, the International Fire Code for 2012, requires this testing to be done every 5 years. So I think that would be a very reasonable approach to take here today, to require this testing to be done every 5 years, to require it to be certified in order for the rental license to be issued. But I would ask council to take a look at taking this one step further, and that is fire doesn't discriminate between residential units and commercial units. So to the extent that we have these external fire escapes on commercial buildings, commercial properties, we need to be requiring at least the very same thing. Because if there is an emergency, if there is a fire, we need to be able to safely exit these buildings so that we don't have another catastrophic event like we did January 12th, 2014. We've done some preliminary research into the cost, and I know there's a gentleman here from Boston who could probably more ably address the issue, but we've seen that these inspections cost anywhere between $200 and $500. This is going to be spread over the course of 5 years. At the low end, we're talking about less than $4 a month to the landlords. At the high end, we're talking about $10 a month to the landlords. Public safety requires that these inspections be done, and the costs simply are not a deterrent. They are minimal, and when spread out over the course of 5 years, any landlord in this city can afford them, and they should be forced to do what is necessary to get these inspections and to prevent an event like this from happening in the future. I thank council very much for their attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. We'll hold on questions until the second witness testifies, but our condolences to the family. You know, there are no words, there are no laws that will, you know, adequately deal with a loss of life. The only thing we can do is to learn from what happens in the course of our business and what happens in the course of development, to try to gain knowledge from that and do what we can, which is within reason, to safeguard life. I mean, a parent sends a kid to school, they want them to come home after that educational experience, and so our condolences to the family.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Chairman of the respective committees joining today for this hearing. My name is Daryl Zaslow. I'm legal counsel to HAPCO, the Homeowners Association of Philadelphia. Excuse me. As you may be aware, HAPCO represents several 100,000 housing units here in the city of Philadelphia, which are rental units. A lot of them, as you've heard today, single-family dwellings, but larger buildings as well, of course, are part of the issue before you. In our testimony, Harvey Spear is unable to be here. He sends his condolences that he's not here. We took the liberty in our testimony of outlining for you our perception of what the existing code regulations are. I don't know if it's oversimplistic to look at that or not, and the panel knows exactly every detail of the code, but nevertheless we have set it out to help focus on where we are at present and think where you may wish to go in the future. So we pointed out that there are existing regulations regarding fire escapes and that the fire department has the duty and the power, specifically as set forth in the code, to enforce all regulations regarding fire escapes. The owner of a property is already required, very specifically by the code, to ensure that all appurtenances and architectural features, and we've heard today properly so, a fire escape is exactly within that definition, that the owner of the property must maintain that appurtenance, that fire escape, in good repair. It must be properly anchored, and it must be kept in a safe and sound condition. The code further requires that exposed surfaces of a fire escape must be protected by proper weather coating materials. The code further is specific, as we've heard today, and it's so important, that fire escapes be kept clear and unobstructed at all times, and that it be maintained in good working order at all times. It must be kept free of ice and snow. Broken or missing parts are required to be replaced, and trash may not be allowed to be stored or accumulating on that fire escape. There's also some very technical requirements about load strength and handrails and access and location, but the point is that there are a great deal of regulations in place at the present time regarding fire escapes. From the perspective of property owners, we would say, on the one hand, there is another hand which we're going to discuss with you, but on the one hand, the existing law is well suited to require maintenance and compliance with the code provisions. The code clearly requires the owner to be 100% responsible to make sure that the fire escape is safe and not a danger. Of course, the question here today is whether this self-policing, another word I've heard here today, has been satisfactory, and given the tragedy which has befallen the city, and Mr. Guarini, of course, intimately acquainted with it, it frankly will be very hard for us as property owners to sit here today and suggest to you that the status quo of good behavior by property owners and self-policing and self-enforcement has been adequate. Had it been adequate, 100%, we wouldn't be here today, so obviously it has not been. You may hear Ms. Gertz of the apartment owners who discussed this with me and alerted me to the fact, as Mr. Maynard did also today, regarding the facade inspection, which is required every 5 years, and by some qualified third party. And we would like to make sure the committee understands that owners rebel, they chafe against any regulation because we often feel the regulations are already on the books, and you legislators are searching for ways to solve problems when the problems are answered in the existing code of regulations. It's rather the administration and enforcement that doesn't occur to your satisfaction or anyone's satisfaction. So having said all of that, we also want to say we are concerned, as always, that these matters always seem to address landlords. And frequently it is landlords that need to answer to something. But as you've heard here today, you have commercial buildings with fire escapes. You have condominiums. I'm not sure where that would fit in with any licensing or inspections that you're thinking of, because you're talking about a rental license, and a condominium, a building that's been converted to a condominium and may have a fire escape, may or may not have rental licenses because it's owner occupied. So again, HAPCO's desire is to convey our good citizenship and wanting things to be right, but simultaneously look beyond landlords as the culprit in so many things that occur. Having said all of that, from the perspective of my organization, and I can't speak for the apartment owners, the qualified spokeswoman is obviously here and will testify next, it appears, We've heard the 5-year suggestion for a third-party inspector, and we feel that it is a reasonable requirement to impose upon owners of property. We would request that when you come down to drafting legislation, that some attention be paid to whether or not it really needs to be some certified engineer on all that. Can it be a qualified inspector of some kind, short of an engineer? I'm not sure what the difference would make practically, but we would want that to be considered at that time. If you accept the inspection, the mandatory inspection on a 5-year period, it should be made clear that the existing code allows the fire department to mandate inspections anytime they want. We understand they're overwhelmed, and may heaven protect them as they protect us in what they do, but the fact remains as a matter of law that they could inspect everything they wanted to inspect tomorrow morning and issue orders to say we want to see something more. We're not suggesting that they should be burdened with that. They're overburdened with so much else. But the point of it is that if you are weighing the inspection period, and we would rather have come into you and say, oh, 10 years, 7 years, and yet we're trying to be forthright with the panel and with the council, and a 5-year number seems to be acceptable on all sides, and therefore we're not looking to argue about the number of years. We would point out that if the argument would be it should be less than 5 years, that again, every requirement that we recited as I began my testimony, good maintenance, good repair, checking it, the owner's responsibility, none of that goes away during the 5 years. Every requirement to properly maintain that appurtenance of that building continues every day of the 5 years. So it's not as if something is being given up and the owner is somehow free and clear to maintain a faulty fire escape just because the inspection is 5 years away. The inspection is the requirement that the fire escape be in a safe condition continues throughout every day of the year and through the 5 years. So that basically is our take on the issue. We stand ready, as always, to work with you on the actual language of legislation. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I think the last 10 words you said in your testimony is the one I will hold most dear, which is work with you. And what we want to do is, and keep in mind, and we you know, I said this to representatives of the fire department and L&I before the hearing starts. We hear problems and try to solve them. We rely on people who actually do it every day to get input so that we can get it right. And that's the purpose of these hearings, and that's the purpose of getting that input, and to find common ground that makes sense. And some things we won't compromise on, but things that we can compromise on, we will. And so it's good to know that you are interested in the 5-year period, and that's good. But also, we haven't decided as to what a third-party inspector or what it looks like, or whether or not the fire department has the capability to actually do it. So the idea here is to find out where best we can do what we intend to do. And we agree that the laws are already on the books. The question becomes who is going to enforce them, and how regularly they will be checked. Because we trust everybody, but as Reagan said, we trust but verify. And as I said in the testimony, 90, and I'll even go 92.5% of the people that actually do this don't need us to regulate them. They would do it because it's the right thing to do. But it's that 7 or so % that we always have to make the laws for. So we appreciate your testimony, and I recognize Councilman Blackwell, who is here, but also I'm going to recognize Councilman Heenan to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And gentlemen, thank you for testifying here. I have just a couple quick questions. One, I want to make a comment to Mr. Zaslow and your organizations that he represents. And it sounds like you've been a part of the conversations thus far to date, you know, to where we are today. And I want to give you all kind of the credit for being a part of that, you know, being included, because my office and myself, it's extremely important to have the stakeholders engage and involve the entire process because, one, we get to understand not only a reality of the situation or what we're trying to accomplish, and here, you know, it's to save lives. And, you know, it's unfortunate that most code, from a code making standpoint, the codes are adjusted or adopted because of unfortunate tragedies, and that's national, whether it's the NFPA or other property maintenance adjustments, especially going through the national vetting process. So, you know, we may have to bring, and we should bring things to 2014 as things change, new construction, ratings, separate egresses, you know, for fire and emergencies, but we're stuck with old, we're stuck with old surplus of properties here in the city of Philadelphia that are being used. So I thank you for being a part of that. Question for Mr. Guarini. You're talking about the codes, all right, that we are currently working off of. 2009, I believe, and failed to adopt the 2012, the Uniform Construction Code, and, you know, there's going to be a long year, arduous process to consider 2015 from a state level. How does that differ for existing properties now operating off of 2009 as we move towards 15? You would mention something in your testimony or in your comments. What does that do for us moving forward? What kind of position does that put us in as a city, as for public safety, the people that we're elected to serve?
Sure. I think the main change that we're here to talk about today is that the 2012 code now requires this inspection, whereas the 2009 code did not require the inspection and the 5-year certification. So I'm not here to ask council to adopt the 2012 code in toto. This provision, the fire escape certification inspection provision, is what we're here to talk about, and the International Fire Code of 2012 provides the standard that council could very easily adopt.
So, all right, so I do know the process from a state level, and we can't, as it exists now, we cannot even go back to 2012 and consider any of the changes, you know, from 2009. We would just have consideration for 2015 for the adoption of the 2015 Uniform Construction Code. So let me ask you a question this way. It would be better to have new codes, 2015 codes, adopted through every municipality in the Commonwealth, as opposed to continuing to operate off of 2009 codes. Is that a fair, correct statement?
Sure, but in the interim, let's not wait until 2015. Let's fix this issue now.
No, I understand, but we can't. So we can, should we be a strong advocate to adopt 2015 Uniform Construction Codes, which has those changes in it?
I haven't seen the 2015 construction codes to tell you that you should or should not adopt it now. What I'm telling you is, independent of whether it's in the code or not in the code, steal it from them. They've given you the standard. You don't need to call it the International Fire Code. Use the language, take the idea, and adopt it here.
We should adopt it. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say, well, for the record, the city of Philadelphia should encourage the state of Pennsylvania to adopt the 2015 Uniform Construction Codes.
You can do as you please, Councilman. What I'm here to talk about is this narrow issue, which is the fire escape provision. The other issues don't concern us, my clients today. We're concerned about the fire escape issue. And whether it's from adopting the fire code or the uniform, whatever code, we want that provision adopted.
Those provisions will be in the 2015 Uniform Construction Codes. It's whether the Commonwealth chooses to adopt the 2015 Uniform Construction Codes, which would include those provisions, which would have those fire and safety standards from a property maintenance perspective for the city of Philadelphia. So I know the problem. I'm kind of just like throwing it out there for you to say that I concur. Right? The new code the 2012 has the safety measures. I think that, you know, the introducer of this bill and the majority leader and the chairman of public safety is trying to get to. But we as a city we do not have that opportunity to adopt them, and I think we all should encourage the adoption of the 2015 Uniform Construction Code.
With respect to the fire escape standards, we wholeheartedly concur.
There you go. See, it's hard with attorneys. They don't give up. They don't give up. Councilman O?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Mr. Zaslow, what I'm gathering from your testimony is that on behalf of your organization, you are fine with a 5-year inspection for any and all outdoor fire escapes in the city of Philadelphia.
Again, I'll answer with just a tad of legalese. The short answer is yes, but we do want to make sure that the requirements as it ends up being enacted are not so onerous and overburdensome and expensive that we rebel not at the concept but at the implementation of it. Mr. Guarini gives a number of, a few $100 if in fact this inspection is implemented in such a way that that is the ballpark for an inspection of a fire escape. It's very hard to argue that there's something inappropriate about that. If it starts to become some enormous procedure and expense, then we might be requesting that the language of the implementation be examined.
Okay, so based on what you've heard today, that the inspection is going to run about $200 to $500 every 5 years, and provided that you're not stuck with the bill of the inspection from the fire department, I don't know how much that would be, but you're fine as long as it's a reasonable cost. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that is correct. As long as the license fee is a typical City of Philadelphia license fee based solely on the cost of the city to issue the license, not as a revenue producer, yes.
Okay. Secondly, that there should be a certificate that this was, that every 5 years that their inspection has been done, and the certificate is provided to the City of Philadelphia to be kept on file and maintained there. You're fine with that?
It would be appropriate, it seems to us, that if we're required to certify something, that the city sees the certification.
And do your members, do they have insurance for their buildings to include the fire escapes?
Your insurance discussion was fascinating. I am not aware of anything in the Philadelphia City Code that mandates an owner to have insurance. Like Councilman Jones was discussing, you're mandated to have car insurance. I don't think there's anything mandating property insurance. If I'm wrong, somebody knows it, let them state it. To the extent that any responsible property owner owns property, they will have that property insured. The insurance carrier, unless there's an exclusion for the fire escape, is going to include the fire escape under the insured appurtenances of the property. A good insurance company is going to do their own inspection of some kind and be satisfied that they're taking the burden of not having to pay Mr. Guarini the lawsuit that these people have a right to bring and are bringing. But that's all after the fact. To pay damages to injured parties through insurance is good for the injured parties, better than nothing, but of course nobody wants to be injured. So the inspection by an insurance carrier would be helpful for an insurance carrier who may foot the bill someday for these multi-million-dollar judgments to satisfy themselves that if they're insuring that the building is in fact insurable. My owners can have a little vent cap on the sidewalk that the insurance carrier comes along and says, oh, we're not insuring your property because of a 6-inch vent cover which is missing, and someone's going to trip and fall on the vent cover, and you're going to be sued, and we're going to have to pay for it. So if you want us to insure your house, then you're going to correct that problem. Good insurance companies will do that, and the bigger the building, and my coordinating organization, the apartment owners who own larger buildings can probably speak even better to it than I can, but the insurance carriers are, if they're doing their job, are looking at what they're insuring. They're not accepting some property owners, my property is completely safe, insure me. They're going to make sure, to the insurance company's satisfaction, that the property warrants being insured and they're not buying liability for a fire trap the first day that they give the insurance. So it's helpful. I wish I could argue to you that it should be completely sufficient to solve the problems because it's easier for the property owners, frankly, I don't think that it does. I think it's just an additional layer of protection for injured parties, a layer of protection to make sure that the building itself is in some kind of safe condition because an insurance company has examined it, but it doesn't solve the uninsured properties, and it doesn't solve properties where the insurance carriers don't do a good inspection. So that would be my response.
Okay, so, as we are, I think, all in agreement that the city should inspect and we should have our firefighters educate and all that. The reality is, we don't have that much personnel, and we don't have a lot of extra money, and our firefighters are always on call and always in need. And while we'd like to do it, I'm just kind of surprised and open-minded to learn more, but I have always kind of understood, incorrectly it appears, that if you are a building owner that is inviting people in to lease or rent your office or your residential units, that you are not insuring them against the liabilities of injuries that may occur through neglect or poor maintenance. I just always thought that...
Many people are self-insured, as it's called in the industry, self-insured, which means they have no insurance.
That's kind of a tricky word for me, because self-insurance may be underinsured or just, so there seems to be like, you could invite people in, and the value of your one building is not enough to cover the catastrophic injury that may occur. Listen, I'm trying to jack up insurance here, but I think that's the discussion we're having about adequate public safety and triggers and how we practically do this, and not do it in an onerous way, is kind of the balance that we're looking for. So I'm all ears if you, talk to your
Part of the
member.
problem has been in the city of Philadelphia in prior decades, you could not get insurance in a lot of areas. We've all heard redlining and all kinds of terms. There are properties that you couldn't get insurance for except at such an exorbitant rate that people said, I'll take the risk upon myself that if there's some injury, I'm responsible for it. But that's not a solution. The responsible owners do insure their property for their own protection.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe.
Thank you, Councilman. Are there any other questions for this panel? Seeing none, thank you for your
Thank you
testimony.
very much. Thank you, Councilman.
Appreciate it. And will the clerk please read the next set of witnesses to testify?
Phil Lord, Christine Gertz.
Good afternoon. Have a seat at the witness table. State your name for the record and begin your testimony, please.
Phil Lord, Tenant Union Representative Network or TURN.
I'm Christine Young-Gertz. I'm with the Pennsylvania Apartment Association East. We used to be known as the Apartment Association of Greater Philadelphia. We changed our name this year.
Why don't you go first and then Phil, you follow up.
Thanks very much. I won't take too much time. Every time I follow Mr. Zaslow and his very eloquent testimony.
I find him eloquent too. I tell him that all the time.
Yeah. We find that we make somewhat the same points on many of the issues. Pennsylvania Apartment Association represents owners and managers and developers of apartment communities, multifamily housing communities, some of the larger buildings or apartment communities in the city. And I just want to make a couple of points, or just reiterate some of the points that Mr. Zaslow made today. I fully agree. I want to start out by saying that responsible rental owners do every day concern themselves with the condition of their fire escapes and their resident safety and any and all fire and safety apparatus and equipment in their buildings. They do so because they're responsible. And I am proud to say that our association, I'll just tell you very quickly, takes that very seriously with regard to what we espouse and advocate for our members. It's industry leaders in responsible property management. And I also want to point out that, the greatest deterrent, the greatest motivation for maintaining fire escapes and CO alarms and everything else is the owner's great exposure to liability and lawsuits. Now, so we all know that the 95% or the vast, vast majority of rental owners in the city are responsible, but I suppose we're not here today to talk about them. We have to address the problem, the very real, very serious problem that the minority of property owners, rental or otherwise, cause and have caused when they don't maintain their fire escapes or everything else adequately. We do not want to see another accident like we just saw. And our condolences and our hearts go out to those who suffered that. But the only thing I would like to suggest is, and to follow up with your noting about insurance and all. I'm personally not aware either of any code or city rule that requires insurance, but I can tell you that the capital markets certainly do. And the larger the apartment community, of course, the greater the load and the need for insurance. So I'm confident that this sort of thing is in place and with responsible rental owners, and I'm confident that the insurance companies will certainly back off from claims and further insuring a property if things like fire escapes are not maintained. So we support inspections. We would love to see license and inspections fully funded. To do the inspections, we realize that the fire department is fully empowered by existing law to require inspections. What we'd like to see, though, going forward in practicalities of the world is a further, let's augment what's in place. Let's not just add superfluous layers to it. So with regard to the people who are doing the inspections, who would be empowered to do inspections, load inspections and otherwise, it doesn't necessarily have to be a structural engineer. Certified fire escape inspectors, I think, can come from a broader swath of professionals, and requirements can be set up by further ordinances to have acceptable professionals approved to do the kinds of inspections. And I would also support, or I would agree with something akin to what is in place now every 5 years, similar to the facade inspections. But what I would ask going forward is, and today really that's my main point, as we do this, let's start off on the right foot. Let's take time to look at what's in place in other cities. The nuts and the bolts, pardon the pun, have to all make sense and be in place. There are cities such as Oregon, Los Angeles, I think Seattle, Boston. I mean, there are a number of things to look at, not to carbon copy them. Philadelphia certainly has to stand on its own with its own particular needs and concerns. But if we can get off on the right foot and continue the dialogue with regard to the devil in the details and the cost effectiveness of any inspections program going forward, I very much appreciate being a part of that dialogue. And that's basically
We appreciate that, and we are looking to, and we have taken into account that the capital market is the greatest driver for safety. If you want a loan, then they want to safeguard their investment by making sure that there are proper insurances. We get that. It's that tier that falls below that that we are very concerned about. There is the landlord that operates on the edge and below certain standards that we deem safe, that often these laws are drivers for. It's not you that has to go out every several years to reappraise a property and get a new mortgage. And no, that's not what we're talking about. All too often we're talking about, and what concerned me was, new rental applicants should, in my opinion, have to go through some set of scrutiny to be included in the ranks of renter, owners of commercial rental opportunities. Because anybody can just throw up a sign that says rent, and it doesn't necessarily safeguard the tenant. And we are looking at that as a standard. And what we try to do, contrary to popular belief, is not be the, obstructionists, not be bureaucratic-laden individuals, but to try to figure out a happy medium. That's why your testimony is important.
Thank you so much. Clearly, we need to do something about the minority of rental owners, the guys who are, as you say, operating under the radar. I'm proud to say those are not the ones I represent. And yes, and thank you for my part at the table to work it out for the better of everybody.
Councilman Heenan.
You know what, I'll hold my line of questioning until Phil Lord is finished with his testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Mr. Lord, please
Thank you.
begin your testimony. State your name for the record.
Philip Lord. I'm the Executive Director of the Tenant Union Representative Network, or TURN. As you may know, we're a tenant service and advocacy organization. We see thousands of tenants every year with problems. And I thank you for this opportunity to testify in regard to this resolution. We're really pleased with all of the options that have been put on the table. We think this is a good exploratory conversation. I think we're going in the right direction, and we share the concern of City Council and others regarding the tragedies that happen. And I think we're also fortunate, frankly, to have landlord organizations like HAPCO and the Pennsylvania Apartment Association that are not in opposition to this and support the basic concept and bring good ideas. And I think that's a good process to get started. I'm also particularly want to make a couple of points that I want to respond to. One is I think I want to emphasize the Attorney Guarini's point that, in fact, this is affordable. So we don't need to belabor that point too much. There was some comment early on in initial testimony that tenants wouldn't want the cost passed on to them. I can't imagine that. There are the tenants we talk to really value their safety, and paying $5, $10 a month to be able to be safe is certainly worth it, and everybody wants to do that. So that is not an issue. The cost is not an issue. Passing it on is not an issue. I think the real issue was already identified by Attorney Zaslow, and that is, and I would put it in this way, that regulation is not the same as enforcement. There's a lot of regulations out there, and we can add more to them, and I think what's being proposed is probably a very good idea, because making a license requirement will elevate the consciousness about this issue. It will help those landlords who are not really thinking about fire escapes to realize that this is an important thing to take care of. At the same time, though, we don't believe that it's going to address the vast majority where this problem might occur, because there are many landlords, as you know, who are not licensed, and probably more likely to be among those who have a problem in this regard. So, and even for those who are, well, first of all, so many landlords not being licensed, I think, is indicative of the fact that the licensing process itself, the enforcement of the licensing process, is inadequate. So when you piggyback something on an inadequate process, you're not going to get excellent results. So you have to make sure that we make sure everybody has a license before you can even make this an effective process. But you have to understand as well what happens when people don't have licenses or they don't comply with the code. Landlords without licenses can be subject to final penalty by L&I. That's a cumbersome process. It's, in our opinion, a rarely enforced process. And the reality is that the really effective enforcement of not being licensed comes from when a landlord tries to evict a tenant and the tenant says, I don't have to pay rent because you didn't have a license. Well, that particular remedy is not as good as it looks, because if the tenant has already paid rent, they can't get a refund, so the landlord is okay, even if they haven't complied with the licensing or other requirements. So it's only the situation where a tenant is behind in their rent or has failed to pay rent because of lack of repairs or withheld rent that the landlord has some penalty for not complying with the code and not getting licensed in an effective kind of way. And so we're really concerned that we do something more than just lift this up by making a new regulation. I think we really have to go to the extra step of having at least audit testing or audit inspections around by the city, whether it's the fire department or the L&I really don't care, but the bottom line is we need to make sure that landlords are at least a little bit worried, whether they get licensed or not, that in fact they may wind up being liable for a hefty penalty of some sort, some kind of fine or something, to make sure they comply with this requirement. So looking forward to exploring it. because it is a safety thing. We wanted to make sure that we don't just dwell on more regulations and not dwell on how they're going to be enforced and how effectively they're going to be enforced, because that's really key. We need more inspectors. I think, we shortchange ourselves when we say we don't have enough resources to inspect properties. We don't have fire inspectors. We don't have enough L&I inspectors. That's very true, but that's a decision that we make. We have to realize that that decision costs lives sometimes, and we have to realize whether it's worthwhile or not. So just want to put that out there. We're glad to be invited to the process. We're just getting involved in this stage of it, and we really appreciate the opportunity to speak about this.
Thank you, and we're going to seek your input on as we go through this, and you're right. One of the things you find out as a legislator, if you research it, the laws are there. It's the question and will, political will, to do the enforcement. And so we're going to look at how we do that and not put too much burden on an overburdened system, but give adequate resources where necessary.
Thank you.
So we're going to do that. Councilman Heenan, do you want to? Chair recognizes
Thank you.
Councilman Heenan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you both for attending here. As always, the two of you and other folks who have testified and answered some questions represent their membership well, and this is not it's good to have responsible associations who represent responsible people and business owners. It's unfortunately that 3 to 5% of every organization, 3% of every crowd. I was told at an early age that 3% of every job or 3% of every crowd is bad. So birds of a feather flock together and everything like that. But there's 97% or 95% of every organization, of every association is good. And we want to hear the good, not just the bad, especially when it comes to public safety and it comes to either crime prevention or public safety with regards to property maintenance and the old housing stock that we do have here in the city of Philadelphia. So thank you for being here and again engaging in the conversations from both the landlord and the tenant perspective, because nobody wants to be unsafe, whether it's the tenant, I mean, you can't rent. I mean, it all has that trickle-down effect, and we don't want anybody to, we don't need any more tragedies here. I think, we are going to have a deeper conversation about how and who inspects and what the qualifications are, because you can get into, and this isn't the time, or the place for it right here, but who's a qualified person, who is not a qualified person. It should be L&I, should be a third person. That's for us all to get together to discuss, to come up with, how we keep people safe. I mean, you take a look at L&I. They do a great job for the limited resources they had. Remember, L&I had resources up here at one point, and now here they are here, and they're trying to do that same amount of work with less money. Less money is less people. Right? And the people that they do, they're multitasking like crazy, taking training classes and getting certifications, as much as they possibly can. Now, I know from just myself, you have technology today, all these different passwords and this and that and codes. I can't even get into my locker at the gym because I can't remember the combination. All right, so it's a lot for one person to come in, check the facade. While you're there, check the other property maintenance issues that you have here. I want to check the, make sure they're in compliance with the NFPA, that we either have adopted or we don't have adopted. Oh, and then check the fire escape and make sure, that it's safe. So, the tenants that are in there are protected in all avenues. So, I mean, I'm hoping to see that, we address a lot of issues through this process, as we have. And look, I have been an observer of City Council for a long time. All right, I've been a member of City Council with some great colleagues who find this, or I'm glad to have this a priority. Property maintenance, inspections, and the way we go about it in all levels, it should be a priority. We are severely understaffed when it comes to our inspectors. New York has under 1 million properties or parcels. We have 578,000 parcels. You can split them up, whether half of them are rental and half of them are not. Doesn't matter. It's about public safety. Right? It's about making sure that we, as you have these two committees and rest of council, making inspections in public safety a priority. We need more inspectors. We need more resources to be responsive to the tenants, to be responsive to the homeowners associations and organizations. Right? There's nothing wrong with people making money in the city of Philadelphia, and there's nothing wrong with people who are trying to make our processes a little bit better and reasonable. But we have a tremendous amount of property, 2,300 inspectors in the city of New York with just under 1 million properties, 578,000 parcels in the city of Philadelphia, and we are, I don't think we make 100. I don't want to be quoted on that, all right, because I think it's split up from construction to property maintenance, after construction, pre-construction, and all that. Under 100. Let's just say it's 70. 70 inspectors who are doing everything and anything possibly they can to make sure that we are safe. All right? Our investment isn't just in the bricks and mortar. Our investment is into the people of the city of Philadelphia. All right? So we need more inspectors. We need more resources for L&I, and we can, maybe the conversation would be a little more different today. All right? But it's not. So I'm glad everybody is a part of the conversations as we try to craft something that's responsible for everybody. So that's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. I had no idea we only had 70 inspectors to go from everything from cranes to drains.
Don't hold me to that quote.
No, I mean,
right, but roughly.
Approximate.
A Herculean task, to say the least, yes.
Chair recognizes Councilman O.
Thank you very much, and I do appreciate your input and your being here, and as my colleagues and the chairman said, it is an ongoing conversation. I think we're all headed in the same direction. A couple points I want to make just to ensure that we're having a productive conversation. We have a lot of regulations, and they are not enforced. They're not enforced because we don't have the personnel or the money, because the people in the city don't have the money or the will to pay, because if they could pay, they'd leave someplace else if they're business folks where they could make more money. That's the reality of the situation. You could look at our schools, you could look at our pension, you get a lot of things in our city. So to get a realistic and practical solution to this problem is what we're dealing with. We have issues of brownouts and fire station closings and other things just with our own firefighters. They're not real happy right now. The cost of this does not seem to be a prohibitive problem here, but I don't think that you will find that you're not going to pick up the tab on this. Yes, you should have insurance, in my opinion, and no, it doesn't exactly mean everything will be fine, because you'll pay your premium, and if a claim comes in and you have not complied, then the insurance company will not cover that. That doesn't make us or the tenants or the building owners happy about that. But having an inspection process every 5 years should, alleviate that problem. But if we're going to inspect every one of these buildings, old and new, that's not going to be borne by the city just as it is. That is going to be, there's going to be a fee involved in that. And, that's going to be, I think, a reasonable fee, okay. But it is going to be passed on to the tenants. I don't know what that fee is, but, probably the landlords will put in their leases that you're not to use the fire escape for social reasons or other reasons, and so forth and so on. And then that's fine. They shouldn't be abused anyway. But this process, does involve coming up with practical, workable solutions, or as you said, we'll have some regulations, some laws, and some initiatives that are not going to be enforced for lack of funding and people to do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Are there any other questions for this panel? Councilman
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, you know, maybe it's because I'm a little under the weather. I might be a little cranky. All right, so, but I think somebody had mentioned earlier about the unscrupulous landlords, all right, the people who don't register with the city of Philadelphia. We're talking about trying to provide a service to keep people safe, all right, the general public, tenants, landlords, so they can operate a responsible business in their profession. How about the people in the city of Philadelphia who don't pay their taxes, who do not register with the city of Philadelphia, who are delinquent for years and years and years? All right, maybe they could pay for some of these programs, all right, that we're trying to look for. Maybe they should come forward. So if they are out there, because I know they're out there, we're going to come looking for you, and wait till the fall, because I got a little surprise. This committee has got some, we got some things that we want to talk about publicly, and we want to make sure that we're trying to hold people accountable, all right, because people lose their lives, right? So, you know, you can't compare apples to apples, all right, when we don't even know where the crumbs are. And they're out there. The crumbs are out there, and they are cheating the system. They're not paying their taxes. And the taxes, believe it or not, go into doing good things, like keeping people safe, putting inspectors on the street, putting police officers on the street, you know, putting in for firefighters so they can have a new academy. Right? That's keeping our libraries safe. You know, more teachers. What? I mean, I pay my taxes. Right? So should they.
Can I just say for the record very quickly, I don't think any responsible property manager will argue your point about going after, as you say, the crumbs, because they make it harder on the rest of us who are playing by the rules and following the highest standards of property maintenance. And absolutely, and going forward, when the discussion going forward with regard to third-party inspections and the time frames involved and the particulars about who can be doing it and all, it's just, I just so appreciate you having all the stakeholders at the table where we can get a full dialogue of the broadest swath, the widest platform of available, responsible, skilled technicians and whoever would be acceptable to the department to do those sorts of inspections, because yes, it's in the interest of everyone to keep the costs down as much as we can. Responsible property owners will pay the cost regardless, because the end of the day is keep the fire escape safe. End of story. So with the cost, but and thank you for whatever input we can have with regard to the fees, which absolutely have to be reasonably related to what the fee is for, and not just a revenue producing source, as you know, has been mentioned before. So again and again, the devil is always in the details. I just really appreciate being a part of the conversation.
If I could just make a quick comment as well. I think when you look at enforcement, it's not simply a matter of trying to look at every building and make sure it gets inspected. It's about significant penalties if there is non-compliance. So if you do random inspections and people get in trouble for not doing what they're supposed to do, and that becomes high profile, people will respond. So you don't have to check every building. You have to make sure that when someone's not licensed or someone doesn't have a decent fire escape, that it's more than just a slap on the wrist, and I think that's important. And the other thing I just want to mention is that insurance companies have a lot to learn about them, but the idea that they do routine inspections of their properties that are insured is something that's new to me, and I've been in real estate for a while. So I'd be very surprised if they come out just to do a routine inspection because they're an insurance company, any more than a car insurance company goes out and looks at your car. They insure based on patterns, and they don't always come out and inspect. So let's make the inspection requirement a city one if we can.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Any other questions for this panel? Seeing none. Thank you again for taking the time. Will the clerk please read the last witness to testify?
Francisco Menes, International Fire Escape Association.
Thank you for your patience. Please come up to the witness table. Got a red shirt on. Is that indicative?
I actually, a lot of times, a lot of my classes that I teach is to the fire prevention side of things, so...
Pull that mic a little closer to you. State your name for the record, please.
Sure, it's Francisco Meneses. I'm from Boston, and I actually was made aware of this. Christine actually called me looking for information. I made her aware of, we've actually done a lot of things throughout the country, because I have taught a fire escape awareness class. I gave you a copy of a book, and I can
Yes, you
leave this
did.
one with
Thank
you. I taught a class here for the Liberty chapter last year that had L&I and some firefighters there, and we have these books that we brought in suggesting some of these things. And just 2 or 3 weeks ago, I taught at PennBach, Pennsylvania Building Officials Association. We taught the same class. A lot of the things you're looking for, there's already answers out there, because sadly, I do have, I'm an expert witness in fire escape tragedy, because I'm usually called in because somebody fell, somebody died, somebody got hurt. It could be a tenant, it could be a fireman, it could be a student. So, some of the things that I want to tell you is that everybody's already said here, all the codes are already there, and just the interpretation of them, basically, and the clarification of them already sets all the steps of fire. So we can put you in contact with city fire officials, city building officials who are already incorporating a lot of these checklist items, and this will, and we'd be more than happy to help and share a lot of this with you, so that, as they say, as you chipping out another wheel, we can say, listen, all these other states and cities, and believe it or not, again, I'm from Boston, the first state to turn over was actually the state of Oregon. And they went not only from this whole process that you're doing now, they actually changed the state code. It took almost 10 years. So it's not like something that you're not going to do this overnight, but the fact that they've already walked the 10 miles, some of the stuff you can just copy and paste and you're ready to go. So this is all open source stuff. You can just go online, everything is open source. So copy and paste all the great ideas and just put your name on top, such as Seattle already has a confidence test ready for you to just download it as a PDF or a Word document. That's going to make all your design professionals stand up and say, I can no longer offer you opinion letters, because that's what you've been getting for the past 50 years. But if you don't mind, I'll just read a couple of notes.
Please.
There was a lot of the stuff that was asked here. There's already an answer for it, or a possible solution of every question that was here. I didn't want to interrupt. I didn't want to raise my hand and say, but a couple of quick ones for you. The International Fire Code of 2012 already gave the fire department the 5-year rule. Whether you've adopted it or not, it's there, meaning it's coming. So International Fire Code says every 5 years you must inspect nationwide. So, and it states in there, by a design professional or others acceptable to the building official, which means if there's a mechanism out there to train fire prevention people to become these inspectors, it's already stated. It has been stated for 100 years on the code. So it's design professional or others acceptable to the building official. So that means a design professional could show up at your building official, and he's a wood guy, an engineer on wood, and your city official can say, I know you're a registered design professional, but I don't accept you. I want this to be something even higher. So there is, but there's another code, and we work with checklists. So the codes, all they need for enforcement is a checklist. We talked about this at every class. If you go online, and it's too bad they took that down, if you just type on YouTube, Fire Escape Seminar, you're going to see 50-plus classes discussing this issue all over the country. I've taught from Seattle to San Diego, Chicago to Texas, from Maine to Florida. So all these classes already exist out there. And again, we did one at the Liberty chapter last year in May 2013, and it's online. It's free for review. And also PennBach just 2-3 weeks ago. Now PennBach, Pennsylvania Building Officials, they brought us in because there was a tragedy here in Philadelphia. So you have tragedies that have happened all over the country. So just since January, you guys may be aware or not, but somebody also died in Colorado Springs. A worker fell because a fire escape collapsed and it almost decapitated him. A fireman in Chicago fell to his death when the ladder let loose. You guys had a fire here that somebody fell to the ground. I've been an expert witness in many cases where they brought me in where students have fell to the ground and didn't get killed, but the lawsuits ensued. People have fallen 5 stories when the fire escapes were missing pieces and they've fallen. So I'm an expert witness in a lot of tragedy. So, but if you look on the back here, this is what happened in Boston in 1973. This woman and her niece and a fireman, the fire escape collapsed on a 4-story building. And this is sort of like Rittenhouse Square. Right now, this is Back Bay. Back Bay, you can't buy a building there for less than $1 million. But back then, when this collapsed, the fireman saved himself with one hand. The woman died, and the niece fell on her, but all the rest of the steel that fell on her. So in '73, they had a code, the International Building Code, which they still have today, and the code is there. It said, you must maintain your fire escapes at all times. There was no 5-year rule. So immediately after this death, they instituted a 5-year rule. So can you do something? The answer is yes. Ordinances, if you can't wait for the state to sort of adopt things that are out there, a lot of times, like Seattle did, Seattle created, when they brought me in, because 4 people almost fell to their death, they brought us in, and what do they have? And you guys talked about that. Tags on all fire escapes. You go to Seattle, you go to Tacoma, you go to Portland, they all have to have a tag. It's a 3 to 5 year process where, so the firemen running down the alleyway, we teach in class all the time. In case of fire, don't use the fire escape as the motto of all your firemen. So why don't we just put that sticker on everybody's window so all the tenants can have the same thing. Say, hey, you know, unless you're gonna die, don't use this fire escape. So the firemen know not to use these things, but the tenants are not told, and that's because there was a collapse in people getting these things under. So they make it mandatory to put a tag. So once a fire escape is evaluated, it gets a yellow tag if it needs repair. It gets a red tag if it's not in service, and they usually close the building. But it's a third-party white tag that gets put on it. So in the middle of the night, our firemen running down the alleyway with the ability to get on the fire escape and save somebody within 3 to 5 minutes, because that's where the smoke kills everybody. He looks up, he sees a white tag that's permanently attached to the fire escape, 7 to 10 feet off the ground. It's white, and it says it has no deficiencies. He's not going to wait for a ladder. He's not going to ask for a truck to show up. He's going to run up this thing. So that's what Seattle did. Tacoma's doing. Portland, Oregon is doing. But it didn't happen overnight, guys. We got all kinds of resistance. We got all kinds of things. But again, by being there, the tags, the confidence test, this is a problem that has actually started with the officials 50 to 75 years ago. They wrote scrape and paint violations 50 to 75 years ago. So when Joe homeowner and Joe commercial owner got this violation, he says, I just got a violation because I had an inspector that was doing his job, and he says, that doesn't look so hot, it's full of rust. So 50 to 75 years ago, they said, oh, let me call Joe the painter. So Joe the painter came down and says, hey, I got this 5-story. How much to paint it? He said, $5,000. Oh, by the way, there's a couple of falling treads there that you should get fixed before, I don't want my guys to get hurt. He said, okay. So he calls John the iron worker to come down. Hey, John, I need you to fix that tread so that I can have Bob the painter paint it. The iron worker says, well, I can paint it too after I fix it, because he wants this guy's money. So all of a sudden he goes up and says, it's not just those 2 treads. My God, we got brackets that are pulling out. I got this, I got that, and I got this other thing. I need $15,000 to fix this thing. So the homeowner is now holding a violation in hand that clearly states, scrape it and paint it. And there was no reinspection process. So the owner says, okay, Bob is 5, John is 15. The violation is very clear. So he tells Bob the painter, fix that one tread with a coat hanger, with duct tape, paper clips, I don't care what you do, and paint this thing. The inspector would drive by a week later, look up, it's nice and black, and we says, remove the violation. That happened 50 years ago. It's been happening for 50 to 75 years. So today, that's the main problem, is that there's no inspection. And whenever anybody did do an evaluation, you got opinion letters, very similar to the one that's issued by Boston. And clearly, this one-page opinion letter has a nice golden parachute for all the design professionals. It says, to the best of my knowledge, information, and belief, this egress component is in conformity with the provisions of the state code, which means I can roll down my window, look up. If none of it in the air is on the ground, I'll write this, and this is my golden parachute that says you can't sue me because I never load tested. All your codes say the same thing, starting with the NFPA. The authority having jurisdiction, which could be your fire or building official, states, the authority having jurisdiction shall accept by load test or other evidence of strength. Other evidence of strength usually means that you refurbish the whole thing, then there is no load test. So this is not a load test push all across the country. This is more of a refurbishment, because load tests are very expensive, and I can share costs with you for inspections, load tests, activities, but it's really about that. It's the fact that there's been a breakdown of an activity that people are not reinforcing these what we teach in the class now. Every inspector writes evaluate, repair, test. Those three statements on any violation, whether it comes from a fire official or building official, already triggers what needs to happen. Evaluation by who? Design professional or others acceptable to the building official. What's repair mean? You got to get a licensed guy to repair the fire escape. Under whose direction? The city official? No. Under the direction of the design professional who's going to give you a repair criteria. And then it says test. It says, what's test mean? It's all the codes say test or certify. Testing means load testing, 100 pounds per square foot. That's 2,000 to 3,000 pounds of sandbags, water. It's a $3,000 to $5,000 per platform kind of cost out there. But it says, or other satisfactory evidence, meaning you don't have to load test a fire escape. After it's been refurbished, there is no load test. And the average cycle that we recommend out there in the nation is that you don't have to load test for another 15 to 25 years. You still have your 5-year cycle of inspection, but because you refurbished, you reset the clock on your fire escape that used to have square head bolts, rivets, now they have, fasteners in there that are brand new. The average life of a fastener is 15 to 25 years if you keep maintaining it. So as long as you keep painting the thing, it'll last indefinitely. In 25 years, the load test question may come up again. What do you do as an owner? You take all the fasteners out again and you reset the clock. So every state has run through what you're doing right now, and a lot of it can be just communications with fire prevention and say, for example, my best guy is Stu White, who suffered through this for 10 years at fire prevention, but the crowning part of that, it was at the end, the state changed the code to accept tags. The state has a confidence test that's mandatory, a checklist item, no more opinions, yes, no questionnaires. So if I may, I'll just say that IFC 2012 says that the 5-year rule is there, design professional, others acceptable to the building official, you must evaluate, test, or certify. By the way, the IBC 2012, there is no provision for maintenance of fire escape. They say, see the fire official. Your code here, 4604.17.5, it says the fire code official is authorized to require testing or other satisfactory evidence. So it's not even building department that they can trigger a load test, but it says in your code, it's the fire official can basically, if he's not satisfied with what's there, he can order a load test on a fire escape. And if you don't mind, I'll just mention that a couple of things that I had. So another one that's going to be very good for L&I, OSHA 1910.37. Now, I found this code by accident on the eve of my Class to Liberty chapter here in Philadelphia, back in May of 2013. I was just doing random search of more information. The code, the OSHA code states that no building under renovation, alteration, or modification can be utilized without having two means of egress. So that means that if you have an internal and another internal egress, you're good. Start repairing that building, But if you don't, if you have a fire escape on the back end that's never been certified, legally, you can't have any employees in that building because it says right in the code, during alterations, renovations, and repairs, you must maintain all egresses and fire protection systems. So if all of a sudden you knowingly, or you've never certified, the fire escape, you basically are not supposed to be issued a permit. So what we teach in class is to make it a checklist item. So after Boston's, what we were in 1973 was this tragedy. The next time we dealt with something in Boston was in 2003 when there was the Station Night fire up in Boston. I mean, not in Boston, in Rhode Island, killed 100 people. They did a news story about fire escapes. So if you go online and you just type in No Way Out, there's a huge story that came out similar to this. Again, we had our collapse, our death. And basically now Boston, building department, to close a permit, you must have a copy of the certification. They don't order one, they want a copy of one. So if you're going to close the permit, we recommend that it's at the beginning of the process that you must have a certification in order to be issued a permit. Housing department, we taught the HUD, all the housing up there now, in order for you to have your building rented to HUD, you must have a copy of the certification. They don't order one, they ask for a copy. These are all triggers. You just make it a checklist item. We also recommend that the fire prevention on the smoke detector sign off. All they need now is a copy of the certification. If there isn't one, it's not necessarily that you stop the process. You can still sign off on the smoke. It triggers a violation that somebody who is getting a certification sign-off didn't have a certification. So it'll be resolved in 30 days. So we have all these triggers that already exist. We even have tax letters that go out from the city officials. So we sent a lot of this information and we can provide you. But it's all in here of other people's activities, because somebody else has suffered the way you're suffering right now. And the last thing we don't need is a second collapse and a second death. But everything that's out there that needs to be done has already been done once. And I'll just, some of the states that you want to model is Seattle, Tacoma, Oregon, Los Angeles has a checklist item that we finally provided to them. And if you want to know if there's anybody out there licensing, right now Boston has a G3 license that lets me sign off on fire escapes. So I've been signing for the past 15 plus years on Harvard University's 375 fire escapes. So can somebody else do it? Yes. In LA, I have a Reg 4 license that lets me certify fire escape assemblies. Now, I'm under fire protection over there, and they license in the state. So if you want to copy somebody, Regulation 4 in Los Angeles, they regulate everybody in fire protection. You got to pay $1,000 to get the license. It renews every 3 years. There's a 100-question test, and not just on fire escapes, sprinklers, alarms, and so I have to hold a license that basically I have to go meet with a fire official. I have to pass my test. I have to answer questions, and then I have to go out with him and do a physical inspection so that I could prove to him that I know what I'm doing on a fire escape inspection. So there's stuff out there that you all just need to do is copy and paste. The state of Oregon, with that change for the state, it's online. Fire escape issues, state of Oregon. They'll tell you even how to scrape and paint the fire escape and what paint to use, what bolts to use. So everything is kind of out there. We can just sort of feed it to you, filter it out and say, okay, here's what we recommend. So since this tragedy, I just taught a class in Atlantic City just a week or so ago. I taught a class in Richmond, Virginia because of you guys. I just taught a class to all the associations in New Jersey. I teach through Kane University a 6-hour continuing ed course on this stuff because it is important, but believe it or not, as it comes out, then there's some pushback, some stopping that happens, people worried about costs, but it's been ignored for 50 to 75 years, so it's not if the next person is going to fall and die in a fire escape, it's when and where. So just in January, Philadelphia, Colorado Springs, Chicago, and this is not including all the collapses out there that nobody reports, because usually they only hit the news when somebody dies. You know what I'm saying? So we have represented nationwide. A firefighter here in New York City fell through a fire escape while saving a woman and a child, and he won a case because he sued the owner for lack. It wasn't a work-related injury. The case settled because he was going after the owner because it was negligence on the owner for not maintaining his fire escapes for over 25 years. And they won the case. They settled simply because that's the case. Are people getting out there hurt on fire escapes that are bad, or are people ignoring? It's a little bit of everybody. Fire officials, building officials, owners, tenants. But if we make this a trigger, a checklist item, a lot of this will happen automatically. You don't have to change codes. You don't have to change laws. But sadly, sometimes you do have to do some ordinances to say, you know what, Seattle didn't wait for the tags to go to the state. They just said, in our city, we want tags. In our cities, we want a confidence test. And that's what it was. It was an amendment to the fire code. They just made it an ordinance. In some cities where the building department is running, they go through the council and they make it that in Philadelphia, we want a tag on every fire escape. We want the 5-year rule. So instead of waiting for national codes to finally wash down and come down, like they said, you can do some local ordinances and just sort of copycat some other places out there or some other cities. And instead of just talking to me, you can actually speak with another fire prevention guy or another building commissioner somewhere and say, tell me all the blowback you got on this and how easy it was or was not to implement, because you're looking at a 3 to 5 year process to get it all under control. But it starts with the first step, and that step is just lean forward. That way, in case you fall, at least you'll gain some ground even while you're falling. So don't lean back. You got to lean forward. There's some heavy wind. That's pretty much all I want to say.
Well, thank you for that. That was a lot.
Sorry.
So no. We thank you. We're looking at other municipalities. You mentioned Oregon. You mentioned LA Regulation 4, Tacoma, and Seattle, so we'll look at that. You also talked about the provision for training. We may seek to call on you to work with our Department of Licenses and Inspection to maybe enhance the skill sets of folk who go out to look for those kinds of things. And definitely to figure out what a competent person or should be in that. So we appreciate the comments. Are there any? Councilman Heaney.
I'll just be real quick. Thank you for coming in. Quite informative. If there are any trial lawyers in the House or watching, I think you'll be giving out plenty of cards, all right, because you're one heck of a expert witness, and rightfully so. So, I mean, you had mentioned, you know, when you look at codes and you look at some of the initiatives, you touched them on all, San Fran, Oregon, Seattle. You know, I mean, Oregon is like the standard for licenses and codes now. I mean, there's a code and license for everything. All right? I mean, there's some things around here that I fully don't understand. I mean, you need to have a license to, it's more on a state uniformity type of thing, but, you know, I mean, you need to, you know, have a license to sell hot dogs, or you need to have a license to cut hair, you know, but, you know, not necessarily, you know, from a state perspective, do you need to have a license to put in, like, safety systems, you know, and things like that. So I mean, we're a little behind the 8 ball on that. And, I mean, you mentioned you're from Boston, right? So, I mean, so Boston, New York, I mean, you got Baltimore. So these are all progressive, you know, cities or states that recognize that we need to have high-quality inspections and accountabilities. And it comes down to training. I mean, we went through it with the unfortunate tragedy here. I mean, who's trained? Who's trained here in the city? Well, why aren't they trained in the things that we do? So you hit on a lot of things, so I appreciate you coming in here, and I think we're certainly going to go back and take what you said with everybody else and see where we compare and see what our inadequacies are and see where we could do better and how we do that responsibly. So I'll be visiting that site that you have there where that book is, you know, because that's interesting. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you again.
If I may just say, if some of these details are discussed in length, so if you do go online and you type in Farscape Seminar PennBOK, that was the latest one that we did, because the Liberty chapter, we didn't have a death in that at the time, but the one that we did for PennBOK, so Farscape Seminar PennBOK, we spent about 4 to 5 hours discussing all the issues with about, I think we had about 40 or 50 inspectors in the class for PennBOK. And we covered those very issues, so you can just actually watch. It's free. You don't have to, you know, sign up for anything. It's all online. It's on a YouTube channel, so you just type in Seminar PennBOK, and all the other classes that we taught in Oregon are there. But the PennBOK one will discuss the tragedies, and it discussed the interrelationship now between fire prevention, building department, housing, and even the health inspector. So we go at length inspecting how these people are now going to be interconnected, because they're all going to trigger everything back. If this was an international fire code state, it would basically, all those people would be triggering names back to the fire prevention group to basically, you know, issue violations because somebody was missing something during a checklist item, pulling a permit, signing off on a smoke detector. So there's 4 hours of great back and forth communication with slides at that PennBOK class, because they did that class because of you guys, because of what occurred here. So a lot of great information is there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you again for your comments. Are there any other witnesses to testify on this resolution? Seeing none, we will hold to the call of the chair of the Joint Committee on Public Safety and License and Inspection, dealing with resolution number 140034. And I want to thank everybody, all of the stakeholders that came out and gave valuable testimony today. We learned a lot. We learned about the need and the proper role for insurances to cover these things. We learned about the need for inspections. Question still becomes who, and we're going to look into that and work with the stakeholders to decide that. We also learned that Councilman Heenan's quest to get the state to adopt the modernized codes is still, and once again, an important mission that we have sent him on. And hopefully at some point in time they will get that message. So we appreciate this and would like to call on each and every one of you to give input on the final end product, and working with Councilman O, Councilman Heenan, and also Councilman Johnson to come up with common sense, make sense provisions that keep us safer in the city of Philadelphia. Thank you all.